Oh, and now I'm very glad to let the floor to our second speaker, which is Osvaldo Negra, which I am glad to introduce now. He was born in Bolzano in Italy, and Osvaldo graduated in 1991 in biology at the University of Parma. In 1992, he carried out a PhD in animal biology at the University of Pisa on the stable and transitory component of an ornithic community of the Tyrrhenian coast of Tuscany. After several research experiences with migratory birds at the National Institute for Wildlife, which is now called ISPRA, in 1997 he became zoology technician at the Museum of Natural Sciences in Trento, in Italy, where he then carried out many years of field research and dissemination activities. Since 2008, following a public competition, he became a permanent employee at MUSE, the Museum of the Natural Sciences of Trento, where he works as a zoologist and science communicator for biodiversity and ecology. Today, Osvaldo Negra will hold an intervention entitled Reconnecting Museum to Water, Heritage, Outdoor Education, and SDGs for Integrated Museum. Osvaldo, thank you very much for being with us. I give you the floor.
Thank you to everybody for being here. Good morning, or better, good afternoon. Now I try to share my... Okay. Is it okay? Do you hear me clearly? Is it okay, everything?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I am my name is Osvaldo Negra. I am a zoologist, not a hydrobiologist. And it's a strange way for me to speak about water, because I am deeply interested in water, but I am not working with water. Just a few words about the place where I live and where I work. Just sorry. Oh, no, it's not working. Okay. Trentino is, or the autonomous province of Trento, is a small place on the southern slope of the Alps. So we are living in a quite rich place about water. There are several glaciers, about 10% of the alpine glacier, more than 100 on Alps, more than 10 in Trentino are in the province of Trento. And we have also a quite great variety of water body, from alpine streams to lowland river. And we host also one of the greatest lakes in Italy, Garda Lake. So different kind of water, different quality of water. Of course, Trentino is a mountain region, not very crowded about people, about 6,000 square kilometers, and a bit more than 400,000 inhabitants. So the density of population is lower than the average Italian density, but the density doesn't take in account that the distribution of the population on the land is absolutely not uniform, of course. Mountain land is a big percentage of the territory, and the mountain land, at least high mountain land, above 2,000 meters above sea level, is not inhabited or very poorly inhabited. So people are concentrating on lowland. So the density of people on lowland could be, in some cases, very, very high. And that's the case of the valley of the river Adige. The Adige is the biggest river we have in northern Italy. And as every big river in the past, it was surrounded by riverine forest, broad-leaved forest, but nothing of this kind of vegetation remains today, because all the lowland have been converted to agricultural land. And so the natural landscape, the habitat and the vegetation succession completely disappeared. Nowadays, we have just small stretches of trees along the river due to security motivation, just to avoid floods and so on. These trees have been cut every 5 or 10 years. So really a bad condition about environmental conservation. Moreover, the river has a very straightened course. The presence of meander completely disappears in the last century after some kind of work carried out by at first by the Austrian government when Trentino was a part of the Austrian Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire. That happens on the land, on the bottom of the valley, as far in the city of Trento. That means Trento, like several other small cities in Italy, Trento is a small city about just a bit more than 100,000 inhabitants, grow up on a bend, on a meander of the river Adige. Of course, it was a good place where to stay, where the stream of the river has a lower speed, where it was easy to create an harbor and so on. But during the Austrian occupancy, the bend of the river Adige in Trento was completely straightened due to security motivation. That means people of Trento was quite afraid from floods, and so the Austrian thinks it could be better to cut down, to straighten all the bend, all the meanders in the course of the Adige River. So between Bolzano and Verona, the Adige River has become, I would say, like a long straightened channel, and the problems, the flood problems, move from Trentino, that means from Austro-Hungarian Empire, to the Republic of Venezia. The bend on the river course didn't completely disappear in Verona, just to have an example. And it's so clear that if you don't cut down the bend, the meander, you can facilitate a bigger or a more narrower connection between the town, the territory, and the river. I never met Edo Brichetti before, but it was strange and curious to think that this is my first topics. That means how much is a town connected with its river? It's easy to understand that it's very common that towns develop along a river and where the river is easier to appreciate. But of course, a lot of modern towns has lost the contact with his river. In Trento, we have had natural history museums since more than 100 years. And as in every small town, people working inside the natural history museum have to deal with natural science on the territory. That means they were collector or researcher devoted to local teams, to local geology, local botany, local zoology, and so on. And in Trento, due also to the richness of lakes on the territory, there was a strong old tradition to hydrobiology and limnology studies. We host one of the strangest lakes of the Alps. I would say it's not very strange. It was just an eutrophic lake with a strange inoccupant. That means with an dinoflagellate algae who takes a red pigment inside, and the reason by which this lake became red during the summer was not clear. So a lot of research have been carried out by the people working at the Natural History Museum in the past to clarify the origin of this reddish coloration of the Tovel Lake during the summer. So inside the museum, there was a tradition to study at first the lake, to study also river, to study water and water organisms, water inhabited organisms. But the museum, the historical museum in Trento, was was hosted in the center, in the old part of the city. So after the cut of the Austrian, after the cut of the river by the Austrian, it was quite far from the river. About 20 years ago, the administration began to think that an industrial zone, which was not more used in the periphery of the city of Trento, along the river Adige, could be used to develop an interesting new cultural pole or a quartier with a high density of cultural opportunities for the citizen. And so there began the construction of several buildings. The project was by the Renzo Piano Building Workshop, that means by a group of architects chiefed by Renzo Piano. And on the northern edge of this quarter, the administration decided to build a new science museum. That means it was the evolution of the old Natural Science Museum of Trento. No more just natural science, but science. Because why? Because the administration understood that the museum was not just a place where people can go to get a better knowledge about natural science of the surrounding territory, but also a place where people can to make experience and to get better instruments to understand the modern world. Of course, modern world means living in modern world means also to have enough capacity to understand the dynamics of scientific, technological, and also socio-economic processes. So a museum could be a place where people can get such kind of skills. The movement towards this new site is such kind of getting narrower to the river. That means the place for the new museum is along the river Adige, and it's separated from the river by a small channel. I cannot not say channel. Maybe it is a stream, an old stream that has been used for getting wastewater, and it's a not quite good place about the conservation of the riverine vegetation. Of course, not good about the conservation of the quality of water. It's heavily organically polluted. But on every case, the museum in this way has got close to two bodies of water. Okay. After about 10 years of project and works, the new museum has been inaugurated in the summer of 2013, and it has been a big occasion and something really new for Italian museology. Of course, it was a first mix of a museum of natural science with a science center. So a mixed form of museum which treated nature and science. The promise of the museum was to become an occasion, an opportunity for everybody to get involved and to acquire knowledge about the uniqueness, about the particular future of the alpine environment. That means we are based inside the Alps, so it's quite obvious that such a museum speaks about nature, man, and interaction between man and nature inside the Alps, and at the same time a place where to get enough awareness of that we are, like every place on Earth, part of a globalized world. That means dynamics about nature, dynamics about science, dynamics about population or economy that we have here as not are not isolated from that on other parts of the world, and so we have to have a better local knowledge to have to get the skill for a better global participation and awareness of processes. The museum, I said, is closer to the river, and it also and it has also built surrounded by water. That means the architects, in their basic idea, means that the museums must be as clear, as transparent as possible. It must looks like something made by air. Of course, it's made by glass, not by air. And it must be surrounded by water with the aim that the water reflect the beautiful shape. So that was the architect said, the beautiful shape of the museum. Of course, water is water, and so if you put a lot of water around a new building, something happens. Water is, on every case, attractive for several organisms living around in the wild, and so the construction of this squared caged water around the museum become attractive for the local population of the green toad. The green toad is a species included in the Habitat Directive, so a very threatened lowland small toad. Is a typical Mediterranean species, and the water body around the museum sounds very attractive for him. The adults become to frequent this water and to try to mate and to put their eggs inside the water. Of course, the water was treated with chlorine, and so reproduction of the European toad did not have a very big success. Moreover, the big glass surface could not be seen by the wild birds, and a lot of birds crashed against the glass. So water and glass was at the beginning a bit a source of problems, but this is another story we will take about a bit later. A museum is a place where there are several opportunities to speak, to raise awareness about water and about its ecological relevance. Of course, we are inside a building, and we can use authentic, true water or some kind of simulation of water. It's dependent from the condition and from the situation, of course. What about the water and sustainable development goals? That means the 16 sustainable development goals are part of the comprehensive mission of the MUSE. That means all the exhibition hosted inside the museum is in one way or in another connected to these kind of goals, and everything, I would say quite everything inside the museum tries to explain or to vehiculate some topics connected with the sustainable development goals. The MUSE is deep. There is a deep idea inside the museum that a museum is a special place where people can get aware of such kind of goals, and also that we can shape the exhibition to make people easier aware of this kind of goals. Of course, we are speaking of sustainable development goals, and they have to deal with water and also with earth. Water is widely present inside the museum, and so we can try to do like a tour from the top to the lower level of the museum, trying to understand in which way we can speak about water and in which way water could be useful to vehiculate ideas or topics connected with the sustainable development goals. Museum as a structure that could resemble a mountain. That was a part of the basic idea of the architects. So the visitors coming inside have to go to the 5th floor, to the top of the museum, and then to go down from there. As they were in mountain and they make a tour, an excursion, and maybe with a cableway or something similar, they go until the top, and then with a very quiet tour, they come down. At the top, we have realized a true replica of a glacier's tongue. And this glacier's tongue is facing a big window. So the light of the sun come on the surface, on the ice surface. And so depending from the hour of the day, the speed of the melting water can increase or diminish. It's quite easy for people to understand that in this case, ice is just frozen water. So it's just another form of water. But in talking about climate change, a lot of people are afraid or take preoccupation about the melting of the glaciers. Okay, you have just a small portion of a glacier in front of you, and you just see the light of the sun coming on the surface. If there is a lot of sun, if the outside temperature is high, it's quite obvious that the melting speed becomes higher. Of course, we try also to treat the glaciers to show the varied amount of information that we can get from the glaciers. Glaciers are made of frozen water, and these frozen waters can belong to other periods, to other epochs. So the water contained inside the glaciers is such a kind of historical or prehistorical memory of other climatic conditions. We can analyze it, and we can get information about the condition of climate in the past. So we try to underline this role of the glaciers as a memory of the past. At the same time, glaciers are big reservoir of fresh water. We don't think about it because we think fresh water is something flowing, but of course, a lot of fresh water has been stored inside the glacier or inside the ice of the glaciers or of Antarctica. The third topics about glacier is that they are not place unsuitable for life. A lot of people think that on ice there is no living beings who can survive. That's not true. That there are several dozen of species of animals living on glaciers. Obviously, they need a very strong degree of adaptation to such extreme condition, and we try through gigantic replicas of some species living on the glaciers or near the glaciers to show such kind of morphological or physiological adaptation to the extreme condition of low temperature, high UV radiation, and so on, that you can find on the glacier surface. Just near the glaciers, we began to describe the different kind of nature we can find on the Alps, and we make a tour through about 25 different environments, from the rocks around the glaciers to the swamp in the lowland. And we try to underline, to outpoint that there are different in the environment, as well on earth, as well on water. And that these differences are depending upon, of course, of altitude and also of season. And season are particularly strong changing if you are at a high altitude. Of course, we try to describe that the different environments are, of course, separated, are different, but are also interconnected. That means there are a lot of ecotones, of zones connecting one environment with the other. Dealing with terrestrial environments, it's quite easy to show the connection because you can treat one environment near the other. But if you have to explain that with aquatic environment that are also more strictly connected than the terrestrial environment, the question is a bit more difficult because for describing aquatic environment, you need, or it's a good opportunity to use big water tanks, to use aquaria. And it's quite complicated to connect aquaria describing different kind of environment, because different kind of environment has different kind of condition and are inhabited by different species that in any cases cannot coexist in the same tank. So the other problem is also that aquaria has a big weight. We have 2, 3, or 4 cube meters aquaria. The weight is more than 3 tons. In any cases, is more than 3 or 4 tons. So it's not allowed to build an aquaria in the center of a room. So due to structural constraint of the building, we have had the opportunity to build the aquaria so near, only near the walls of the building, and in the center of the rooms, it was not allowed. But we don't agree to the idea that people think that the water at the top of the mountain is so separated from the water at the bottom of the valley. Of course, there are different zones, different parts of the course of the river, but they are not separated due to the reason that water is flowing, is a flowing environment. So we try to transmit an idea of continuity using such kind of virtual water. It seems strange, but if you go to this exhibition that we call the Gallery of Biodiversity on Mountains, you find the different terrestrial environment connected to panels, to pictures, to images, and so on. And at the same time, you can find the different aquatic environment connected to this big screen. Of course, they are just a screen, and there is just a simulation, but it's just to get the idea that there is water is typically connecting, is not separating environment. At the same time, we tried to get the people, the citizens visiting the museum more aware of the fact that water, depending from altitude, from of environment, from season, is inhabited by a lot of organisms. Of course, such as several of these organisms are quite big, so it's easy to contact, to perceive them. Others are small or are hidden on the ground. And so you need to be curious, and you need some instruments to detect them. So we use also in this case some gigantic representation of the species living on the ground of the river, of the streams, just to allow the people to know that they exist, so that they are part of the biodiversity of the river. Using screens and small clips, we try also to describe features of the waters that are changing through season or through altitude, something not stable, something that it's difficult to describe with just a picture or with just an object. Of course, that needs a lot of work. It's quite expensive, and maybe it becomes also quite old in a short time. But it's a way, we think, through which it's possible to explain and to show something that moves, something that changes. It's a way to speak about a changing world, like the world of water, about temperature, about light, about organisms living at different depths, and so on. In the first floor, we are speaking about the presence of man on Alps. That means the interaction between humankind and the environment. Of course, a part of the level is devoted to the ancient population of the Alps, but a great amount is also devoted to the present inhabitants of the Alps. And for a lot of present inhabitants of the Alps, water is at first something that could be dangerous. That means people are afraid of water because they are far from water, far in their mind is far from water. That means water is something extraneous to her life. And so they are afraid. They think from water you can get just danger, problems, flood, and so on. So we try to describe that this is part of the fact. Of course, in a mountain environment, you can get heavy damage from floods or from a big amount of snow, avalanche, and so on. But of course, a part of the problem is also connected with our approach to nature. That means the mountain environment is very fragile, and it must be treated with a lot of care, of attention. If we behave in a wrong way, it's quite easy that then floods, avalanche, and so on could be part of our life. We try, of course, also to explain a positive role. That means it could be a very wrong idea if people leave the museum thinking that water in the territory is just a cause of disaster, is just something dangerous, and we just have to thank our administration if there is some kind of surveillance or intervention if something bad happens. Okay, that could be true, but water also has a big role in shaping the territory and in supporting the biodiversity of the territory, and also in supporting the presence of man on the territory. Just to underline the role of water in the shaping of the territory, we use a big reef aquarium, a saltwater marine aquarium, to describe the different kind of tropical environment that existed on the Alpine region at the beginning of the not at the beginning, before the Alpine orogenesis. That means the tropical condition of lagoons, in such cases deep sea, in other cases barrier reef, where a lot of calcareous algae and other calcium depositing organisms has been living for several million of years, and in this way they have deposited the substances that then through to metamorphical processes became different kind of rocks, at first dolomite rocks. So the role of the aquatic environment in generating part of the types of rock that now built the dolomite and other complex of mountains. We would like also to underline the role of the water for humankind, now like in the past. And we have a special gallery inside the museum dedicated to the Anthropocene and to the Sustainable Development Goals. That means to the present time and to the present interaction of men with environment, with other men, of the present interaction of the society, of the human society with the, the surrounding territories. Water in Anthropocene, of course, is containing a lot of biodiversity, but it's a place that are deeply used by men, and we have different kind of use. Such any types of use are very dangerous, are very destructive about biodiversity. So we try to explain the different way in which the actual humankind can get resources from water, and the way through which this use of resources can be highly destructive for the ecosystem and for the biodiversity. We try also to underline that the relation between man and aquatic habitat is very ancient. Okay, we are speaking at first about actual condition, about the present world, but we would facilitate the visitors to remember that our connection as a human species with water is very antique, very old, and we have had a long connection to water. We need water to drink. Water was a resource. Water was a place where prehistoric men, not just Homo sapiens, but also Homo neanderthalensis, put their settlement, because it was a place where to get water for drinking, and where they can easily get food resources like mussels, like fishes, like small mammals living near water, like beavers or similars. And that we make two aquaria devoted to the reconstruction of aquatic environment in archaeological sites that has been developed, one along a series of small alpine lakes, the other, it was a pole settlement in the on the banks of a big lake, the Lake of Ledro, and using also replicas of human figures, showing their connection through their activity, their connection with the water environment. On the ground floor, there is no special topics. That means there is a place that we have organized like a science museum. That means there are a lot of different interactive objects people can use just to understand the dynamics about chemical or physical laws. It's a funny place, but it's a place where there is, on every case, the opportunity to understand something scientific. And so also here we have some exhibits that are working with water, just to explain chemical or physical feature of this kind of element. At the basement, or at the -1 level of the museum, it's a place like a digging in the earth, and we try to describe a bit about the evolution of life on Earth. And of course, we try to point out the absolutely terrific role of water in the evolution of life. Of course, the role of water in hosting the first living beings, from the one-cell living beings to the first multicellular organisms, and also the water as an ecological driver in shaping the organism. Okay, all the first living beings have been aquatic, so it is quite easy to connect their shape, their morphology, their anatomy with their life in water. But we have also example of a secondary aquatic organism like the cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and other big mammals living inside the oceans. So we try to understand how relevant water has been for life, for cellular life, but also for the acquiring of anatomy, physiology, morphology by different kind of small and big organisms living now or in the past inside the water. Inside the museum, in the wall, we have about at least 10 stabile aquaria. That means aquaria that every visitor can find in every period of the year. And we think that working with aquaria, it's a big opportunity to vehiculate a lot of scientific topics. I would say not in a funny, but in a very interesting and engaging way, because an aquarium is a living corner, is a place where you can see, watch, and understand a lot of things watching living organisms. Of course, it's something which changes from a moment to a moment. That means it's something not stable, but of course it's something very, very delicate, and that's arise the question or the problem of hosting living animals inside the museum. That is a big question. Of course, if you have the aim to show something using living beings, a plant, animals, or better, a mix of plants and animals, that means a reconstruction of a small ecosystem, you have a beautiful opportunity to speak about complexity, because you have the opportunity to show how complexity works in the real world. Because if you put a predator species and a prey species in the same tank, okay, you show that a predator need a prey to survive. Okay, it's not a particularly good idea to have a quiet aquarium for a long time, but it's just to remember that showing living organism interacting is a big way to vehiculate ideas of ecology that are, on every case, ideas of complexity, of relation. Of course, you must be very careful, because you have to show and to host organisms in absolutely opportune ways. That means you are a museum, you are not a private, and so you are also representative of a scientific world. Scientific world means a world that must pay a lot of attention to the good condition of the living organism hosted inside a museum. That means that you must have the skill to realize good aquaria with good population, with a good condition of water, not too crowded about organism. You must absolutely avoid it to show organism in bad condition, and to vehiculate the idea that the animals hosted inside the tanks are in a such way suffering. And to do that, of course, you need a lot of people and a lot of places, because you need to have a curator every day of the year, and you need also to have places, service rooms, where you can keep a fish or an amphibian or a bird when it is ill or when it is not in good condition. You need a room where you have where you can prepare the feed for all the organisms. You need a room where you have to prepare the aquaria or the plants before putting them inside the aquarium, and so on. That means the so-called living corner are very, very powerful in explaining, in vehiculating topics about nature, about ecology, about relation among organisms. But they are also very delicate and they need a lot of care. So we have to keep in mind that when we decide to communicate natural relations through containers with living beings. The museum has also a big container inhabited by living beings, and that is the greenhouse. We hosted a greenhouse inside the structure of the museum in consequence of about 2 decades of research about biodiversity and support to local communities on the mountain of the Eastern Arc in Tanzania. It was a joint venture that began about 20 years ago when some researcher passionate for herpetology began to make research on the Eastern Arc. It's a long mountain chain in north-central Tanzania, facing on the east the Indian Ocean, so getting such kind of monsoon rain from the ocean. And it's a place where enough high mountain, about 3,000 meters above sea level, are covered with dense rain and cloudy forest. That means with the forest that get humidity from the rain or from the fog. And a lot of different species have developed in such kind of environment, because the mountain chain acts like an archipelago of different mountain islands. So a huge amount of biodiversity, but also a big threat by the local community, because at the border of the forest there are several villages that use water, and water for cooking, for drinking, for getting water to the fields, and they use the woods coming from the trees of the forest just to prepare charcoal for cooking. So also very basic needs from the man can destroy a very rich environment. And so the activity of the museum was just to describe, to monitor the biodiversity there, and at the same time to support the community with technical skills, in any cases small objects that make the impact of the population of the village less heavy, less deep on the forest. So we try to describe the environment we contribute to protect and to investigate in Tanzania. And in this way, we describe the terrestrial environment, the forest, and also the huge amount of small streams that flows on the surface of the forest, because the rock there is basalt rock, so quite unpermeable, unporous rock. And so is a place with a lot of surface waters that create small pools inhabited by a huge amount of species of small frogs and toads. Of course, the museum has also a lot of outside activities. That means awareness and knowledge about water can be developed also in the territory around the museum. And that can happen in a scientific way. That means doing researches as far as doing activity, funny or entertainment activity with people, with citizens participating to them. Just to remember that we have several sites. The Muse is a kind of network of a museum. I don't know if they can be called eco-museum, but in several cases, the other sites of the Muse on the territory allow people to know better the nature and the land around them. One of these places is in the near of the Red Lake of Tovel, the place where the museum developed a lot of limnological and hydrobiological research in the past centuries. And the other is the Lake of Ledro, where there is a pole settlement of the early Neolithic inhabitants of the Alps. So two places in which people can be easily involved in knowledge about water and about the role of the water for the past humankind. And of course, the museum carries out also a lot of activity to develop awareness about water in young generation, in children or in students. We have had a lot of different experience with that. In one, just to show two of these, in one case, we have had several opportunities to raise citizen science among very young students, children of the first course of school, and they have been involved in a research about the small inhabitants of the grounds of a stream near Trento. It was an experience in which they have been involved together with their parents. So it was interesting to show how an opportunity to get close to water as environment could be deeply engaging for young and for less young generation. That means they become curious about nature, and they get a bit aware of a scientific way to acquire knowledge about nature. That means they have been involved in the way in which the hydrobiologists usually make the so-called biological monitoring of the condition of a stream or of a river. In another case, we organized a series of encounters with the students of a high school, just to know together the different aspects of water, from a physical, from a chemical, and from a biological point of view. And after that, they know enough about these aspects, different aspects of water. Together with them, we managed to organize an aquarium, a class aquarium. That means they take care of this aquarium and of their inhabitants for more than 3 years, and they describe different aspects. That means how the vegetation inside the water changes with the season, how the species behave about territory, about mating, how different species species of fish behave to mate. There are viviparous species and oviparous species, territorial species, pair species, group species, and so on. So they learn about a lot doing something and observing their aquarium about biology, about behavior, about ecology, and so on. And it has been a very formative experience that has been distributed through different years with a greater level of complexity, of course. Museum and also activity of monitoring the retreat of glaciers. That means a way to understand that glaciers are just frozen water, and that this kind of water is very sensitive to climate conditions and to climate changes. That is true on a very wide period of time and also on shorter period of time. One group of research of the museum follow the changes in condition and in extension of glaciers from the little ice age, that means from the late Middle Age until now, just to understand how rapid, how quick can be such kind of variation, changes in temperature and in other climate conditions. As we said before, to raise awareness about the fact that glacier frozen water could be inhabited by several species of organisms, there are research focusing on the small animals, invertebrates community living on the surface of the ice tongues, and also on the way in which climate change affect this community. Of course, due to the global warming, the mass of the glaciers is getting narrower, is getting smaller, and the tongue is going back. So when the tongue of the glacier disappear, a lot of ground is no more covered by ice, and so is suitable for species that are not well adapted to live on ice. The community of organisms seems to change and begins to change. Of course, it seems that at the beginning biodiversity rise up. There are more species than before, but that's true. That's true for a short period, because on a longer way, the species which are strictly connected and strictly adapted to extreme condition of the glacier began to disappear. And after several years, the whole amount of the biodiversity is negative and not positive. So it's just to understand that the idea that if glaciers disappear, there is more land for other living organisms, it's a bit false. It's not something who can facilitate biodiversity, or a part of biodiversity could be greater, but another part, which part is strictly connected with extreme icy environment, will completely disappear. Another way to explain, to investigate the role of water is just to use the water that has been caged inside stalactite and stalagmite as a memory, like those on frozen ice, on glaciers, as a memory of changes in the past climates. You know, the forming of stalactite and stalagmites requires a lot of times, and so it's very, very slow. And so you can compare the different layer and the composition on different layers inside a stalactite or a stalagmite to understand the composition of the atmosphere at the time in which that layer has been formed. a lot, I would say quite half of the territorium of the territory of the province of Trento is covered by carbonatic rock. So the phenomena known as karsismo are quite widespread, and they allowed a lot of water, of rain, water coming from the rain to disappear under the rocks and to reappear in other places where the porous or permeable rock meet another layer or of not porous of unpermeable rocks. And that is the origin of a lot of places in Trentino where you can find spring that usually are at the basis of rock walls where two different types of rock meets together, porous and not porous. And so in the contact zone, the water comes out. You have this very, very particular environment known as a spring. And a group of the researchers of the museum investigate the biota, that means the group of organisms adapted to this particular environment. To reinforce the idea that water has had a big role for humankind since the origin, there are several researchers searching for settlement of the first alpine hunters-gatherers, and then of the first alpine Neolithic farmers or agriculturalists. Several of these settlements are under rocks, under rock walls, because they are these ancient inhabitants need the protection from animals, protection from other human groups, but any of these settlements are along a river or better along lakes, because they need water to drink and they need water as we said before, as a source of feeding resources like fishes and mussels. So there are several places with this kind of investigation about archaeological use of water. And then, of course, water is also seen as water environment are seen also as a place with a very high level of biodiversity, a very localized biodiversity, of course, because the aquatic species in a lot of cases cannot live without water or far from water. So all the water bodies of Trentino, like in every other province, has been described and are catalogued, and a quite big amount of them are also less or more protected. That means in quite good condition, not in every case. So monitoring the population of plant and animals in such cases, in such places, is a good idea to understand how this kind of puntiform protection is effective in conserving biodiversity, in conserving viable population of living animals. Now, the last chapter of the reconnection of museum with water is that the big amount of water that has been conserved with a mirror purpose around the museum is now being converted into living water. That means in the last year we obtained the permission from the architects to use a part of the water that has been conserved just to be a mirror of the building to transform it in a place where to reflect, not mirror, but reflect about the role of water in supporting ecosystem and in conserving biodiversity. So thinking that in Trentino there are about 120 species of water plants. And with water plants, I mean hygrophytes and hydrophytes. That means plants who lives near the water and plants who lives inside the water. And that about 1/3 of these species are treated at different level about their conservation. If we see about the whole amount of plant species present in Trentino, just 1/4 of species are treated. But if we see just at the water plants, the percentage rise up at 1/3. That means water environment has disappeared, and so it's easier that water plants are more treated than earth plants. Not far from Trento, there is a water plant nursery that has been managed for several years by the administration.
Il webinar è così.
Sorry. And so we get a lot of specimens of endangered plants, and we build around the museum such a kind of pond. It's enough, I would say, if it is enough big, about 600 square meters. We began with using a plastic sheet to make the ground impermeable, and then we shaped a new water environment with different depth, with different level of water, just with the aim to allow there to grow different kind of plants. There is a plan about that. A big amount of plants has been yet put there, and they began hopefully to grow in the forthcoming spring. So we hope to have a well-rich place about biodiversity in the following year, and to have the opportunity to use that to get a lot of citizens more close to the water environment. That's all. I apologize for my English. It's really a lot of time since that I don't speak English, and so I am